My name is Charles D. Fairbanks. I'm known as Don. I was a World War II veteran. I was in the 8th Air Force as a tail gunner on B-24s, and I'm 86 years old. I was down at Lunken Airport, which is a local airport here, walking around, and a couple of flight instructors, one of them came out of the hangar and says, "Hey, the Japs just bombed Pearl Harbor." The guy said, "Where in the hell is Pearl Harbor?" That's what we knew about history. I was in high school at the time. I was a senior in high school. About 2 weeks before graduation, 4 of us went down to enlist in the U.S. Army Air Corps. I was the only one old enough by about 2 or 3 months, so I signed up. I was called up in mid-1942, and of course, like everybody else, I signed up for pilot training. I get on my first physical. I have a slight deafness in one ear, so they wouldn't pass me. They said, take these tests and we'll decide what we're going to do. So I took 3 tests for gunnery, armament rather, maintenance, and communications. And they said I did well on all three of them, so I could pick any one I wanted. So I took aircraft maintenance. They sent me to Keesler Field down in Biloxi, Mississippi, to become a mechanic on a B-24. And when we graduated, they said, would you like to become a gunner? So I took the very same physical I failed, passed it, no problems. Went through gunnery school at Laredo, Texas, graduated from Laredo.
What's gunnery school like? What do you do in gunnery school? How do they teach you how to be a gunner on a bomber?
Well, all the gunnery training is basically the same, and then they just graduate you into something you're going to learn on. I went to gunnery school in Laredo, Texas, and they started us off originally with BB guns that fired a stream of BBs, and they had moving model airplanes in the background, and we just shot at those. Then we moved into shotguns, and eventually we got into machine guns. Started 30 caliber machine gun, then we went into the 50 caliber. We did our flying. The first flying was done in the back of a T6.
Oh, really? Shooting
at targets towed by another T6. Then we moved up to twin beaches that had a turret on them. And from that, we went into either a Hudson or sometimes a Martin B-26. The operation was a very early operation set up by what is now the CIA. It was called OSS at that time. And we didn't know what
OSS stand for.
Office of Strategic Services, Office of Strategic Services. And it was started very early in World War II, and we were very early in World War II. The thing that surprised us, we get to England, and they take us to the base we're going to operate off of. And the first thing is, the commanding officer got all 6 crews in there, and he said, we're a very secret operation. If we catch you talking to anybody that we don't recognize, you're subject to being shot. That gets your attention when you're only 18 years old.
So they said if you were talking to anybody that they didn't know, you'd be shot.
Yeah.
That was kind of an awakening.
They kept us away from other people on the base. Our operation was separate. We're very confined to what we did. We started off, there were 2 squadrons. Each squadron had 6 B-24s for a total of 12 B-24s. As the squadron grew through the war, they ended up having 80 B-24s. So we flew our first mission in February 1943. The operation itself had started in, I think the first mission was in January, where they flew basically test missions with the RAF, which was doing this sort of thing beforehand. We flew at night.
But you didn't know what you were going to do yet.
We found out, yeah.
But you didn't know at that point.
What we actually ended up doing was flying these B-24s are all painted black. They had suppressors on the guns and suppressors on the exhaust of the engine where you couldn't see them in flight. We were dropping supplies, like we're like early Federal Express. People on the ground would want some specific material like guns, ammunition, supplies for medicine, this sort of thing. We'd fly at night and drop in a specific area. The area that we dropped in was about as big as 2, maybe 3 football fields. We'd come over the ground about 400 feet off the ground and drop our supplies in that small area. The area was marked by 3 people on the ground with flashlights. 2 of them were lined up at probably several hundred yards apart, lined up with the wind. And on the upwind end of the pattern, a guy was standing with a flashlight, and he would give us a code which changed every 2 hours. If he gave us the right code, when we flew over the first flashlight, we had containers with the supplies in. They were on parachutes. We just dropped everything all at once. We carried 12 containers. So they just all went out at 300 feet. Being a tail gunner, I got to see I'm getting ahead of my story. I ceased being a ball gunner when I put on the crew. They reduced the crew to 8 men instead of 12 or 10. And they put me back in the tail. There's no longer a ball turret on the airplane.
Oh, okay. What happened to the ball turret?
Where the ball turret was, they had put a liner around the inside where it went through the floor and through the bottom of the fuselage. And that was where people went out. We carried people. When we dropped them, we dropped them from about 500, 600 feet. But they went out, they had a static line on a parachute also, and they'd make maybe two or three swings before they hit the ground. And they were very special agents. They were trained to do a specific job, or they were trained to meet up with a specific underground unit and bring them money or special equipment that they needed for that operation. You didn't have to, we had draft at that time, but there was an awful lot of people who did not go through the draft. Like myself, we enlisted. Nowadays, it seems like people that are patriotic stand out because it's something that most people don't even think about. We didn't think about it either because it's just natural. It's like getting dressed in the morning or something. You don't think about it, you just do it.
My name is John Steele. I'm 85 years old this month. I'm a World War II vet.
And you did what?
And I flew TBMs during the war.
For the Navy?
For the Navy.
What were you doing on December 7th, 1941?
I was in Cincinnati. I can remember so well standing at the stairway of our house. My father was there, and he said, we've just been invaded in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by the Japanese, and we'll run those devils off the map in 3 months. That was my recollection of when I first heard it. Of course, I realized later on that his view of when we would run them out was a little distorted.
How old were you then?
I was 17. Well, I can't tell you that I was any hero in combat because I wasn't.
Well, did you learn how to dive bomb?
Oh yeah, well I had one experience that was rather striking. We did a lot of that in our training.
What's that like?
Out in the Pacific. Well, the 2 500s or 1,000 pound bomb is what we would carry. And we go up maybe to between 10 and 15,000 feet and come down. One time we were supposed to come down at about a 45-degree angle and get down within about 1,000 to 800 to 1,000 feet.
From 15,000 feet, you dive at a 40-degree angle to 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
You have to figure that out a long way.
We'd have to do a little maneuvering to avoid flak and so forth. But one time I was going too steeply. And I was at the bottom of the dive and had armed the bomb. It was a 1,000-pound bomb. When I pulled out, my tail gunner looked in the bomb bay and he said, we still have the bomb in the bomb bay. It didn't get out. I had gone too steeply, and the darn thing, when I pushed the pickle, as they called it, to drop it, it went forward into the head of the bomb bay and lodged in there, kind of tilted off to the side. And since it was armed, I called our squadron, the group I was with. I said, I've got this problem, so I'm not going to rendezvous with you. They said, many thanks. So we pulled up, and I guess I pulled up to about 3,000 feet or so, and shook the plane as much as I could. And the tail gunner said, it's out, it's out. And in a few seconds, we heard it go off when it hit the water. So that was a little bit
Was this
dicey.
in combat? Were you actually going for a Japanese ship?
Not for a Japanese ship. We were in training. We always did training, regardless of where we were. We called it training. They'd send us up with bombs, and if we'd seen an enemy ship, we would have used them, but we didn't.
Wow.
Or depth charges.
Well, anything else you want to share?
I don't think of anything, John. I'll probably think of a few things in my sleep
I
tonight.
just think of what was your scariest moment of your entire Navy?
I think that was it,
Yeah.
that bomb. Because I wouldn't be here today if the darn thing hadn't, if it had gone off. It could have gone off because it was armed. And fortunately, they have a propeller in the front of them. That has to turn so many times before it actually will blow. And it hadn't, when it went down to the head of the bomb bay, it hadn't turned enough times to have blown up. Had it turned that many times, it would have blown us to smithereens. So I thank my lucky stars for that.
Who was your tail gunner?
Tail gunner was a fellow named Bob Lane. He lived in St. Louis. And I had a turret gunner, Bill Pollock, who lives in the South Winston-Salem. They were with me all the time in TBMs.
My name is Ken Glass. I'm 87 years old. I was a World War II veteran, flying off the USS Hornet, CV-12 torpedo bombers, Grumman Avenger. Let's see, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot like most everyone did at that time. But the Battle of Midway had just been fought, and as you recall, there were 3 squadrons, Torpedo 8 that was wiped out completely, and the other 2 squadrons lost about 85% of their people. So when I hit advanced training at Corpus Christi, they said, you will be a torpedo bomber pilot. And you don't argue. So that's what I ended up as, a torpedo bomber pilot. So who knows? If I'd have been a fighter pilot, maybe I wouldn't be here talking with you. And soon after that, you're being launched. Well, you get into the air, and you're supposed to be catch up with your plane circling at a certain altitude. Well, you know, pitch black, you can't see anything, no lights, and it's a big mess. It was actually, my mind was more dangerous than the actual combat hop. So you hit prop wash, which makes you think you're going to run into a plane at any minute. So on this very first flight, finally a couple of planes joined up on me. I never did join up on my skipper.
It was dark. You have no lights on your
Oh
plane?
yeah, pitch black.
And there's no lights on your airplanes?
Just no, because the only thing you see is the exhaust flame coming out. You know, you didn't want to be vulnerable to enemy aircraft. So anyway, I take the lead. We start in with 2 planes on my wings. We get about halfway there, and all at once there's machine gun fire going under my wings. Oh boy, first flight, I'm going to be shot down right away. But we had been told to practice our guns to see if they worked. So my wingman had opened up fire, had forgotten about that. So then we got out to the target, and we had mines. We had to go down into the harbor at Palau. And we had to go right down inside the harbor. We got there, and by this time there were Jap Zeros around shooting at planes, and we were in and out of the clouds trying to avoid them. And
Did you have fighter cover?
no, didn't have any fighter cover. We were all by ourselves. And the planes all, you know, there were different planes around. So we started down into this, and the anti-aircraft fire was up on these hills, and we had to go right down between the hills into the harbor, and of course they were zeroing in on us. But we got in there and dropped our mines and got out of there, and we got back safely back to the carrier. We did lose two of our planes were shot down. Torpedo bombers were shot down, and they were picked up by submarines. And then back on the Hornet, one plane hit the island structure and spun off into the water, and the pilot and one crewman was killed. And then on the very next flight, I went in the water and was picked up by a destroyer that was later sunk in a typhoon. And I was aboard 2 weeks. The weather got rough. I couldn't get back aboard, and I was seasick.
What was the circumstances you ended up in the water?
On a takeoff.
Tell me about that.
Well, as I started down the deck, our captain at that time was a Captain Browning, and he wouldn't give the pilots enough deck, even though we had the deck, but he wouldn't do it. He had the misconceived notion that the further up the deck to the takeoff spot, the quicker we could get the planes off, which just wasn't true, and so we did lose planes. If your engine coughed once going down the deck with 2,000 pounds, you're not going to make it sometimes, and that's what happened to me. I was able to keep the plane in the air for about 3 miles. I tried everything. I tried to melt the flaps up. I dropped the flaps. I did everything, but I didn't. So anyway, I went in the water. Our next, another flight I remember, the first flight in over a truck. I don't know if you've ever heard of a truck or not, but that was the Pearl Harbor of the Japanese. I mean, they was well fortified, and they was loaded with anti-aircraft guns. And
Tell me about that.
we went in, again, I was on the first flight with the skipper. As we approached, quite often over those islands or atolls, there'd be a cloud cover. It's just the nature of the beast out there. And as we came in over the target, there was a cloud cover.
This is truck. Okay.
A truck. And all at once, somebody discovered a little hole in the clouds, and all the planes started going down through this hole to get underneath the cloud cover. And of course, the Japanese started putting their anti-aircraft fire right there on that hole. Well, I went through the hole behind my skipper and came down and picked out a target down below and went down for it and hit some buildings on the airfield. And as I pulled up, incidentally, when you pull up out of a dive, you black out every time because you're pulling 6 or 7 Gs. And but it's nothing to worry about, because as soon as you start to level out a little bit, your senses come back and you're fully conscious. But anyway, as I pulled up, I looked around, and there were 5 of our airplanes on fire in the air at that time. Now, these were not all torpedo bombers. Some were dive bombers and fighters. And that was the day or two where the submarine Tang was stationed off the island, the atoll out there, to pick up downed pilots. And they picked up 26 pilots that time. There were that many shot down. Of course, a lot of them were killed in addition. And one of our pilots in our torpedo squadron was shot down, and he was shot down inside the atoll, and he and his crew had to get their life raft out and paddle out over the atoll and out to the ocean where they could be picked up, which they were. But that picture was in Life magazine all over for a long, long time, showing the USS Tang with they couldn't get all the pilots down into the submarine, so they were out on the deck and everywhere else hanging on till they could be transferred to a destroyer or something.
Did you ever ground loop?
Never did, no. I'm extremely lucky. I never, the only accident I ever had in the Navy in 30 years of flying, on a field carrier landing, when I took the cut, I nicked a wingtip as the plane landed on the ground on a field carrier landing practice. But all the time I flew on the carrier, I never hit a barrier, never had an accident. So I was good. No, I was lucky.
My name is Tom Griffin. I'm 93 years old. I'm a veteran of World War II. I was in the old Army Air Force in World War II as a navigator. And in the first offensive action of the war from the air, I flew with Jimmy Doolittle on the first attack on Japan in the spring and April of 1942. Our group was suddenly ordered down to South Carolina. This was in the springtime now, about 6 weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And when we got there, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle met us and said that he was looking for volunteers for a very unusual mission and had unusual elements of danger in it. He wanted to warn us about this and to ask for volunteers. And of course, our whole group volunteered. It was wartime, we were the Air Force, so everybody volunteered. And they sent 16 crews of us, actually 20 crews of us, down to Eglin Field, Florida, in that springtime of 1942, where we had the unusual work of learning to take these B-25 aircraft up in about 450 to 500 feet, which was a plane where you usually wanted about a mile for a nice run for a takeoff. But we had to learn to horse them up because we were told that we were going to take this aircraft off of an aircraft carrier, something that had never been done before. Certainly not fully loaded. They'd taken a couple of empty ones off So we trained there at Eglin Field for about 6 weeks. And then we flew out to California, San Francisco, where our newest carrier, the Hornet, had just come into dock there. And our 16 planes were loaded on the deck of the Hornet. The Navy told us when we landed there that they couldn't accommodate all 20 of our planes. We had 20 planes and 20 crews trained for this. So we had to just eliminate 4 planes and crews right there. Although we took the crews with us for security reasons.
Did they use cranes just to put them on the deck?
That's right, yes. They lifted each one of our planes up and put it on the deck. And we did not go out of, we thought we were going to sneak out of San Francisco Bay under cover of darkness that night. Everything was blacked out. This was wartime conditions. And we were very amazed. Late in the afternoon, the loudspeaker on the carrier came out and said that the Doolittle Raiders, Doolittle personnel, could go into San Francisco and have the night on the town. And of course, we went in and had a very memorable night. And
can you tell me about that? Can you tell me about your night on the town?
Well, of course, we all at one time or another were up at the top of the Mark, which is the bar up in the top of the Mark Hopkins Hotel, or the favorite meeting place. And we split up into groups of friends of 5 or 6 in a group, and we would meet at different nightclubs through that night in different places in the town. And lo and behold, at 7 o'clock in the morning, every one of us showed up at this pier where we were told to be at 7 in the morning so we could be picked up and taken back out to the carrier, which was an amazing thing in itself. Everybody was there. The Navy personnel were very cold to us because we were so close-mouthed, we wouldn't tell them anything that we might know, and they just thought that they were taking this Air Force group someplace, probably to Hawaii, and they resented it that the great carrier was being used as a transport ship. But when we got out about a half an hour past the Golden Gate Bridge, the loudspeaker came on, and Captain Mitcher gave the word that we were going to Tokyo, and the Army boys are going to take off and bomb Tokyo in Japan.
Did that change everything?
Oh, that changed everything. They became such good friends of us, the Navy personnel. After that, they got us into all their poker games in the ensuing days. And most of the Doolittle Raiders took off 18 days later flat broke. We left all of our money with the Navy boys there. We were prepared. We had briefings every morning. And there was one time when they realized that if we were caught by the Japanese at any time in the next 24 hours or so, that our planes couldn't reach Japan, so our planes would just be thrown overboard, so the Navy planes could be brought up to protect the convoy. Then we had days when we were told, you can reach Japan. If we're detected today, you will take off, bomb your targets, and then you will be out of gas and bail out over Japan. And so that prevailed for a while. These different situations, yeah.
As you kept moving closer, the scenarios changed.
We had different plans for where we were going to be if anything happened. They didn't find us until we were about a day away. We were about 600 to 700 miles out when we went between some Japanese ships off of Japan. And Captain Bull Halsey, who was on the Enterprise, sent word over that we were to take off immediately. We took off according to the best figure we could make. We would run out of gas someplace over the China Sea before we got to China. And we made our runs on Japan, bombed our assigned targets about noontime, ran into a lot of Japanese Zeros over the Tokyo and Japan the area, and none of our boys were shot down. And we flew all that day down to the southern tip of the Japanese islands and headed due west across the China Sea. Now here we were expecting in our computations to have a westerly wind, a wind out of the west, which would have been a headwind. This was the prevailing wind, particularly this time of year. And to our great delight, we discovered when we took a wind drift that the very strong wind that we were in was coming out of the east, a tailwind, which made all of the difference. Instead of running out of fuel over the China Sea and having to go in the water, we had enough thrust with this wind to at least reach the China coast, every one of our planes. About 4 or 5 of them ditched in the water right along the coast, and the rest of us pulled up into the storm. It was nighttime now. We'd been, to give you an idea of the length of the flight with all this extra gas, from the time that my plane, number 9, took off from the carrier deck till we ran out of gas over China, we were in the air for 15 and a half hours. So we got an awful lot of time with the gas we had at an economical fuel setting for hours on our. 11 of our planes pulled up into the storm. It was nighttime now. And we just had to dead reckon into it. And when we ran out of gas, we just bailed out. 11 planes, 55 men bailed out. 1 man was killed on the bailout, one of the 55 men. And about a half a dozen others were hurt one way or another, broken bones of one kind, by landing on bad terrain after they came.
I'm Ted Gardner. I'm 88 years old. I'm a veteran of World War II, the United States Navy, where I served for 4 years on 2 different ships. I was a college student at Oregon State College, then called Oregon State College. Today it's Oregon State University. In Corvallis, Oregon. I was in my junior year, 1941, December the 7th. And it was a Sunday, and I'd gone to church, and church was out at noon, and this was on the West Coast, Pacific time, and I took the bus from church back to the fraternity house, and I noticed all the fellows were out in front of the house, talking in little groups and animated conversation and so forth. And I got off the bus and walked up, and I said, what's going on? These guys are usually in the sack at this time on Sunday. And then they told me. I hadn't heard a word about it until then. Pearl Harbor had been attacked by the Japanese, and we'd suffered terrible, terrible damage. And we were at war, and actually we'd already expected to go to war before that happened, but it was an amazing experience, indelible in one's memory, that all of a sudden you're thrown from the protected environment of a college to a worldwide military operation. The next day, on Monday morning, 3 of my fraternity brothers and I, we'd already had a pact that when we went to war, we'd all go in together, 4 of us. And Monday morning, we went down in Corvallis, which is the home of Oregon State, to sign up with the Navy, and they took us right away. On the Cullinan Bay, I was a gunnery officer, and during the battle, I was on the bridge with the captain. I really had the catbird seat. And
Is there an island on that particular type of ship?
yes, a very small island, and the island contained the CIC, which was the Combat Information Center. It had all of the radar equipment, and there was a signal platform for the signalmen and their flags, and all that. But it was very small compared. The ship was 500 feet long. The flight deck was 410 feet. And the main,
That's short.
yeah, very short and very light, and they were built for what they called flank speed, would be 15 knots. Well, we never could even make flank speed. We usually, top speed would be 13 or 14 knots, and we had to fire off our planes, every one of them, by catapult.
I was going to say that if you were a pilot on that type of vessel, you could land and take off, and you could land and take off anywhere, I would think.
Oh, absolutely, and they were so brave, and we lost a lot of planes just in flight operations, over the side, over the bow, taking off, couldn't get enough speed up. Terrible, terrible disasters. I lost a lot of friends. But I was the aide to the captain and the air officer. The air officer was third in command on the ship and in charge of the air operations for the day. And air operations were simple. I mean, the planes flew off, and then we were out there empty, waiting for them to come back. We took so much damage. The old Cullinan Bay wound up with about a 13-degree starboard list. And water was pouring into the ship. We were going to sink. And of course, our planes couldn't come back. We were hit by 2 kamikaze planes at the end of the battle.
What was that like?
That was terrible. That was awful, because the first one that came in on a flat approach because he'd started for a vertical dive, and we were doing evasive maneuvers. And he had to flatten out his dive to even hit our ship. And he hit the port side of the ship, and along the port side of the ship were the 20-millimeter guns of our carrier. And he hit the ship and exploded, spewing flaming gasoline all over the gunners along the ship. And they were terribly, terribly burned, and it was horrible. And the flight deck of the ship was Douglas fir lumber, no steel, because it made sense. It helped the traction for the wheels of the plane to land when they came into land. It helped slow the plane down when it hit the flight deck. But it also burned. And we had fires in the flight deck, and so things were destroyed, and there was no way to take anything aboard. And our flyers, who were then out, some of them came back looking for us, and we had to wave them off at the end of the day. And they had to try and find a place to land on another carrier or on a strip on the island of Samar or the island of Leyte that day, later in the day.